Welcome everyone to another episode of Retro Wrestling Reviews. Fredo Esparza here, and this week we look back at Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling's December 26, 1981 show. Before we get to the review, be sure to click that subscribe button. We'll have more wrestling show reviews as well as the Lucha World podcast and other content available. This episode of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling was taped on December 10th, 1981 at the WPCQ TV studios in Charlotte, North Carolina. Bob Caudle and David Crockett are on commentary for this week's episode. And it opens with Sergeant Slaughter joining Bob Caudle to talk about the $1,000 Cobra Clutch Challenge. Slaughter tells Caudle that he could come out here and talk about how great he is, but that would take up the entire hour of the show. Sergeant Slaughter says he still has the $1,000 because no one can break the hold, and he's been working hard getting his biceps and forearms ready. NWA representative Sandy Scott joins them and says he hasn't seen Slaughter do any of the challenges, and all he's seen is Slaughter talk about it. Scott tells Slaughter that they will have a drawing to see who will take on the challenge. Sergeant Slaughter tells Scott that he doesn't need a drawing because he has Tony Russo, Mike Miller, and Charlie Fulton all lined up. Scott brings out a sheet of paper with the list of challengers that includes Mike Davis, Keith Larson, Jake Roberts, Blackjack Mulligan Jr., and Ricky Steamboat. Slaughter was okay with the first three, but not the last three. He gets upset as he's told he'll have to put the money up today. The first match on the show is Blackjack Mulligan Jr., who is Barry Windham, and Jake the Snake Roberts beating Charlie Fulton and Mike Miller after a knee lift from Jake the Snake Roberts. This was a competitive tag match and probably the best match on the show, but still just an okay match. Some quick tags from Mulligan Jr. and Roberts. I thought this was also an interesting tag match because normally Mulligan Jr. and Roberts, their opponents are usually way shorter, and this time around they actually were able to get guys who kind of matched them size-wise or height-wise. So it wasn't this there wasn't this big disparity in the match. So it kind of looked like it was a little bit more competitive. Although I don't think anybody thought Charlie Fulton and Mike Miller were going to win this match, but at least it made it a little bit more of a competitive match. After that match came the second match, which was Billy Robinson beating Tony Anthony after a backbreaker. This was the other match that had some good moments in it. Robinson looked great in the match in this short match against a pretty good young wrestler in Tony Anthony. Really enjoyed how Robinson transitioned from one move to the next. That's one of the things you're going to love about like Billy Robinson, Tony Charles, and some of the British wrestlers when they start wrestling, whenever they would wrestle in the United States, their transition wrestling was very smooth. Not all of them, but the ones that were really known for being great technical wrestlers. After that, we get some promos for Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling's TV. They are done by Austin Idol, Ivan Koloff, and Rowdy Roddy Piper. Austin Idol talked about how he doesn't have to talk about how good looking he is despite talking about it for a bit. He also mentioned Coach Bo Schembechler. Ivan Koloff is looking forward to invading the Michigan area. Piper then says it's a pleasure for the Michigan TV affiliate to have him, and he says he's Roddy Piper and you are not. The third match on the show is Ivan Koloff beating Keith Larson after he rammed Larson headfirst into the mat with his knee placed to the back of his head when he jumped off the top ropes with his, it's that move where he places the head on, places his knee across the guy's head and just falls onto the mat. It's a really cool spot. This match was for Koloff's NWA TV title. Again, a short match with Koloff dominating most of the match. Sandy Scott returns and says that Gene Anderson has found a loophole in that Ninja's contract about him wrestling Paul Jones. But Scott found a loophole as well in Gene's contract and that he will be the one facing Paul Jones instead. I think this is on one of the house shows. Johnny Weaver then joins Bob Caudle to talk about the Ricky Steamboat and Roddy Piper saga. He mentions a battle royal that they will be both participating in and wouldn't be shocked if they end up against each other, and says battle royals usually bring unexpected matchups. Ray Stevens then joins Bob Caudle and talks about how upset he is at Ole Anderson for trying to sacrifice him. He says he used to think Gene Anderson was somewhat intelligent, but says if he's going to let his brother use his head like a coconut, then he must not be very intelligent. He vows to kick Ole Anderson's can whenever they meet. The fourth match on the show is Terry Taylor beating Tony Russo after catching him with a forearm across the ropes for the pin. I believe this is Terry Taylor's rookie year, so because they've mentioned him being the rookie of the year. It might have been his rookie year, it might have been his second year, but they kind of kept talking about him being a rookie of the year, so it might have been his second year in wrestling, him coming into Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. During the match, Sandy Scott returns to let everyone know that they held the drawing for the $1,000 Cobra Clutch Challenge, and it will be Blackjack Mulligan Jr. challenging Sergeant Slaughter. This was, again, the Terry Taylor-Russo match was a pretty competitive short match, with Russo getting in some offense, but Taylor really pretty much controlling the match for the most part. Some more promos for TV show in Ann Arbor, Michigan follow, with Ray Stevens talking about the tough competition in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling. Johnny Weaver says being in Ann Arbor, Michigan is like coming home. Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant joins Weaver. Valiant calls Johnny Weaver Johnson. He called him Johnson Weaver. And Weaver tells him there are a lot of women in Ann Arbor, which pleases the Boogie Woogie Man. I thought that was pretty hilarious how he started calling him Johnson Weaver. That was one of the things that Jimmy Valiant does whenever he would do interviews. He would come up with a new name for whoever he was doing the promos with or interviews with. Very interesting interviews from Jimmy Valiant. The last match on the show is Pretty Boy Karl Fergie and Ox Baker beating Don Cornudo and Vinny Valentino after a heart punch from Baker at Valentino, followed by Fergie covering him for the pin. Match was well paced when Fergie was in against Cornudo or Valentino, and then slowed down when Baker would get in, but they tagged in and out quite a bit, so you mostly got Fergie in the match. Baker was going to go for a second heart punch, but the referee stopped him. I don't know. That might be one of the odd couple matchups I've ever seen as far as a tag team goes. Karl Fergie and Ox Baker, I have no idea. But, to be fair, back in that time period, you really had a lot of odd couple type of teams. It wasn't, and you still do get that every once in a while, but there's a lot from that during the territorial days when you would be like, why would Karl Fergie and Ox Baker team up? But it's a weird combination. They held the Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling Tag Team titles, so they had some level of success. Finally, to close out the show, Sandy Scott returns for the $1,000 Cobra Clutch Challenge. Sergeant Slaughter tells him that he would have liked to have seen how he drew Blackjack Mulligan Jr.'s name out of the hat or whatever he used. Private Jim Nelson also shows up and stands outside the ring. Slaughter brings in the chair and tells Mulligan Jr. to sit on the chair. Sergeant Slaughter stalls a bit again in putting Mulligan Jr. in the Cobra Clutch. Finally, Sergeant Slaughter hits Mulligan Jr. with an elbow across the neck. Sandy Scott warns Sergeant Slaughter about doing that again. So again, Sergeant Slaughter pulls Mulligan Jr. by the hair and the fans start to scream. He puts Mulligan Jr. in the Cobra Clutch. Mulligan Jr. drives Slaughter into the corner. He tries to drag him off him, but Slaughter keeps the clutch locked in. Mulligan Jr. refuses to give up and again throws him into the turnbuckles, but Slaughter keeps the hold locked in. The crowd starts chanting for Blackjack Mulligan Jr. Slaughter lays in a few knees into Mulligan Jr.'s midsection as he continues to keep him locked in the hold as TV time runs out. As the credits are rolling, we see that Mulligan Jr. appears to have broken out of the Cobra Clutch. Thought this was a good episode. Show was built around Slaughter's $1,000 Cobra Clutch Challenge and Blackjack Mulligan Jr. taking him on. That was the highlight of the show. They pretty much ended the episode with us trying to figure out if Mulligan Jr. had actually broken out of the hold, and he actually did. So kind of like a cliffhanger towards the end where you kind of can see that he's breaking out of the hold, but with the credits rolling and everything else, you're not really 100% sure. Matches for the most part were okay and kept short. There were some good moments, especially in the first couple of matches, but again, it really was all about that Mulligan Jr. taking on the challenge of Slaughter, and I thought Slaughter was great on the mic too. A great heel promo from Slaughter. I mean, the fact that he would be so braggadocious about this challenge, and then really only want to accept some of the enhancement talent guys taking the challenge, and whenever somebody who was a name, be it Ricky Steamboat or Jay Youngblood or Blackjack Mulligan Jr. or Jake the Snake Roberts. He kind of didn't want to do it, but I thought that was the charm of Sergeant Slaughter during this time period. He is, I mean, Sergeant Slaughter is an awesome promo in Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling. You know, it's definitely something you guys should check out. That's it for this review. Be sure to subscribe to the Retro Wrestling YouTube channel, and we'll be back again soon with more reviews.